Dune is a beautiful film. It's a monumental achievement in both world building and spectacle. With that said, beauty alone doesn't make a story resonate. In Dune, the grandeur leaves little room for what truly matters: its characters. What makes stories like The Lord of the Rings so beloved isn't just their scale, it's the moments that slow down, allowing us to connect with these characters on a deeply human level.
Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam?
So before I dive into all my issues with the Dune films, I'd really like to highlight some of the things I think it does well, because honestly there's a ton to love about these movies. And first of all, the film is visually stunning. Denis is a great director, and he always seems to pair himself with the perfect cinematographer for all of his films. Be it Roger Deakins on Blade Runner 2049 and Prisoners, and now Greg Fraser with Dune. And alongside the beautiful cinematography, we have top-notch production design. I mean, it was no simple task to bring Arrakis to life like he did, and it was really fucking impressive. Denis is a master of creating worlds that feel massive and alive. The visual distinction between House Atreides and the Harkonnens is perfection. One side with beautiful, elegant ships and a structured military, the other industrial, dark, and grotesque. We have the introduction of the Sardaukar army with the throat chanting and ritualistic bloodletting, perfectly conveying their brutality and culture within just a few seconds. And beyond just the visuals, the sound design is next level, and it's topped off by Hans Zimmer's fucking amazing score. And honestly, most importantly of all, it's a faithful adaptation of the source material. The film displays the novel's themes of ecological destruction, political manipulation, and destiny perfectly. Now with all of this going for it, why can't I seem to connect to these films? Well, world building and spectacle are only a small part of what allows a story to be memorable and immersive. Without time to connect with these characters, the stakes feel hollow. Without emotional downtime, I have no reason to care. And that, to me, is where Dune falters. I think where I draw a lot of my expectations for the Dune films, we simply need to look towards the greatest fantasy series of all time, The Lord of the Rings. And I think where I see the Dune films falling short, the Lord of the Rings series shines particularly bright. The Lord of the Rings is full of strong character moments, and I think these are a big part of what allows these films to connect with such a large audience as deeply as they do. When looking back at these films, I think the second entry to the series, which is my personal favorite, handles these moments the most effectively. Unlike Dune, where the relentless plot and spectacle overshadow personal moments, The Two Towers goes out of its way to make time to explore its characters in quieter, more emotionally driven scenes, showing their vulnerabilities, fears, and motivations. These downtime scenes feel organic, even in a story filled to the brim with grand battles and journeys. Frodo and Sam's campfire conversations are small yet deeply impactful.
What's in this? Nothing. Just a bit of seasoning. I thought maybe if we was having a roast chicken one night or something. Roast chicken? You never know.
This scene, for example, shows us Sam's blind optimism. Is it essential? No, but it teaches us so much about these characters that we wouldn't have learned otherwise, and it helps us see them as real people. Another example would be after the Warg attack. Aragorn has a quiet exchange with Legolas about the hopelessness of their fight.
Then I shall die as one of them!
This scene shows Aragorn's vulnerability and his struggle as a leader. By giving him a moment of doubt, Jackson deepens his character and makes his eventual rise as king feel earned. In Dune, the absence of true downtime, or at least focused downtime, doesn't allow the impact of important emotional beats to resonate. For example, in Dune Part 1, we have an emotional scene between Duke Leto and Jessica, where he strongly suspects he won't make it through the upcoming events, asking her to protect Paul.
Now I'm asking you this one thing. If anything happens, will you protect our son?
With my life.
I'm not asking his mother, I'm asking the Bene Gesserit.
This scene is great, however the same effort should have been placed between Leto and Paul directly. And not only that, after the fall of House Atreides, Jessica and Paul flee into the desert, facing dehydration and the pursuit of Harkonnen forces. This should be a harrowing and emotionally tense sequence, but the film focuses heavily on the physical danger and escape and very little on the emotional fallout and the betrayal of the massacre. Jessica just lost her partner and has seen her world destroyed. This emotional moment they crafted was entirely laid to waste because she never grieves or reflects upon her loss. This scene could have been used to develop her into a more emotionally complex character. Jackson uses relationships to provide emotional depth to his characters, ensuring that the stakes of the larger conflict feels personal. This is particularly evident in The Two Towers. Even if we're just taking into account the occurrences of Helm's Deep, we're provided more to emotionally unpack than the entirety of Dune. From Theoden's redemption to the grief of his dead son, all of which lead to his eventual resolve to fight at Helm's Deep, are truly moving.
Yes. The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep. One last time.
Eowyn's quiet moments, such as caring for Theoden in his despair or expressing her desire to break free from societal constraints, add emotional layers to both characters.
I am no man.
Jackson allows these characters to process their grief and fears in intimate moments, making their eventual triumphs and sacrifices much more meaningful. In Dune, relationships like Paul and Chani's or Paul and Duke Leto's feel underdeveloped because the film doesn't slow down enough to explore them. By contrast, Jackson always prioritizes relationships first and then action. So not only does Jackson slow down the pace in order to give the characters time to develop and converse, he also seamlessly intertwines soft, relatable moments amidst the epic stakes in order to remind us of his character's humanity, and these moments make the characters feel real. Like in the build-up to Helm's Deep, we see Gimli and Legolas exchanging lighthearted jabs.
What's happening out there?
Shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
These moments provide levity and remind us that these characters are still people with humor and their own flaws. It strengthens their camaraderie and gives the audience a much needed emotional breather. Dune resolves to stay tonally consistent throughout, and honestly that's to its detriment. The film is painfully stoic, distant, and fast-paced, leaving very little downtime. While Dune's action is visually stunning, any character that actually has charisma, like Duncan Idaho or Duke Leto, are killed unceremoniously. But the emotional impact feels muted because their relationship with Paul isn't fully fleshed out on screen. Ultimately, Jackson understands that epic storytelling is only as powerful as the emotional core driving it. For every massive battle or sweeping landscape, it balances it with intimate emotional scenes that focus on the characters' internal struggles, relationships, and growth. This balance of spectacle and intimacy is where The Lord of the Rings excels, where Dune struggles. Now I know thus far this probably comes off as me just shitting on Denis' work, but honestly a lot of my disappointment comes from seeing the potential in his previous work. If we take a look back to just a few years prior to Dune, we can compare it to Denis' masterpiece, Blade Runner 2049. Though I will note he had nothing to do with the writing of Blade Runner, so that may be the difference maker. In Blade Runner 2049, the pacing is deliberately slowed to allow for quiet, introspective moments where characters reflect on their identities and relationships. These moments deepen the emotional core of the story and make the characters feel much more human and relatable, be they replicant or not. Scenes like Kay sitting in his apartment sharing quiet moments with Joy, his holographic companion, or staring and contemplating at the snow to emphasize his isolation and internal struggle. Kay spends a significant amount of his screen time alone, regularly reflecting on his identity as a replicant and his purpose in life. These scenes are vital in developing emotional depth, and they allow the audience to connect with him through his longing for meaning and connection. His quiet humanity becomes the film's emotional anchor. While Paul Atreides also grapples with questions about his destiny and identity, Dune's relentless pacing often prevents the film from lingering on his introspection. We see Paul's conflict, but we rarely feel it on an emotional level because the film moves so quickly from one event to the next. Kay's relationship with Joy, who again is an AI, is central to his emotional journey. Despite being an artificial relationship through and through, their interactions feel tender and meaningful. When Joy calls Kay Joe for the first time, it becomes a small but profound moment of connection for Kay, who longs to feel special and loved. The subtle way Gosling reacts, both hopeful and hesitant, adds emotional weight to the scene. Denis allows these scenes to breathe, letting the audience feel the emotional tension and longing between the characters. And Joy's eventual death when her emitter is destroyed hits hard because we've watched their bond develop organically. Relationships in Dune, like Paul and Chani's, feel underdeveloped because the film doesn't care to linger on moments of connection. Their relationship feels more symbolic than emotionally engaging, with only fleeting moments of interaction. Paul and Chani have a conversation in the desert which leads to a kiss, but the two speak of nothing deeper than you would tell a new friend. Paul could have revealed how his visions are weighing on it, making him fear becoming a tool rather than a leader. Chani could have shared her doubts about trusting an outsider and her concerns for her people's future. Any type of deeper exchange would not only humanize their characters, but also allow the audience to witness the gradual building of trust and emotional connection, making their romance feel earned rather than preordained. I mean, honestly, I find it hilarious that in his previous film, he made a relationship between a robot and an AI 10 times more impactful than what was presented in Dune. Another way in which Blade Runner outshines Dune is the way they handled destiny. For much of the film, Kay believes he might be the child of Deckard and Rachel, a replicant born naturally, making him unique. This belief gives him hope and a sense of purpose. But when Kay discovers the truth that he isn't the chosen one, his reaction is devastatingly subtle. He doesn't lash out. Instead, his quiet acceptance and continued resolve show his emotional growth. Kay's journey subverts the traditional chosen one narrative. Denis gives us time to process Kay's disappointment, making his ultimate choice to help Deckard feel even more heroic and poignant. In contrast, Paul Atreides' arc as the chosen one feels less emotionally satisfying because the film focuses more on the external conflict and his visions rather than his internal struggle. While the weight of Paul's destiny is made obvious, the emotional toll isn't fully explored. And that's why in the end I was able to connect with Blade Runner on a much deeper level, possibly due to the narrower scope of the story being told, which allowed for a bit more time to be spent on character development and emotional moments. But regardless, it truly does feel like Dune suffered when they decided to prioritize scale over crafting deep relatable characters. So now that I've spent way too much time talking about every movie but Dune in my Dune video, let's get into it. I know I've mentioned some issues with the character relations already, but I want to give a bit more context into how the film failed to make me truly care about any of its protagonists. So let's start with Chani. Now, if you watch my podcast, you already know this, but I'm not the biggest Zendaya fan. I think she's displayed pretty minimal range as an actress thus far in her career, and I don't think this film does her any favors. With that said, I can't truly blame her, as I don't think the script really gave her much room to prove herself. Chani appears mostly in visions throughout the first film, and then in brief, quiet scenes once Paul meets the Fremen. While Paul is drawn to her, the relationship progresses too rapidly throughout the second film, and the whole relationship just seems to lack any depth or level of development. The film desperately needed a scene or scenes where they discuss their hopes and dreams or lives outside of the immediate conflict, and that could have made their bond feel more earned and emotional, something akin to Frodo and Sam's conversations in the Two Towers. The way it is now, they love each other because fate said so, and really that isn't enough to make me give a shit. They could have honestly brought her in towards the end of the first movie and given them more time to kind of build up that relationship. Now let's move on to Lady Jessica, and I know I kind of already touched on her character a bit, but this one is the most disappointing for me because as a fan of the books, I truly found her character to be the most interesting. Lady Jessica as a Bene Gesserit is a deeply complex character. She's torn between her love for Paul as a mother and her commitment to the Bene Gesserit's manipulative breeding program. While we get glimpses of her struggle, her emotional turmoil is often sidelined. We rarely get to see the toll taken on her by this conflict. Instead, her role is largely functional. She trains Paul, she reacts to threats, and she drives the plot forward. That's it. In the novel, we got to be inside of her head, understand her thoughts directly, and since this isn't possible in film, they needed to give her more moments of reflection, either with Paul or in solitude to humanize her. We do get like one scene of her crying for a split second in part 1, but it's like an immediate snap back to stoicism, and it just doesn't work for me. It's really unfortunate because it really does feel like such a waste of a great character. Next, we can talk about Duncan Idaho, and honestly, he's probably the most likable character in Dune, largely thanks to Jason Momoa's charisma. However, his death, while heroic, lacks any kind of emotional weight that it should have carried. While we see Paul and Duncan share a few lighthearted moments, there isn't enough of their bond shown on screen for the audience to feel the full impact of his sacrifice. We could have used some sort of scene or scenes before the chaos, perhaps where Duncan opens up to Paul, to deepen the relationship between the two. Anything that would have made his death a bit more of a powerful moment. If we compare his death to a moment like Aragorn's goodbye to Boromir in the Fellowship of the Ring, it's not even comparable. And that's because they spent so much time building up Boromir's character and his loyalty and redemption are felt deeply. And finally, we have Paul. As for Paul, honestly my main disappointment is simply they didn't let Timothée Chalamet act. He really is a great actor when he has the right scripts. I look back on the final scene of Call Me By Your Name regularly because of just how powerful and subtle that scene is. When you have an actor that has the range required to really make a character you truly care about, why mute all of their emotion and resort to blind stoicism 100% of the time? With all that said, I think Paul is the character I have the hardest time putting a finger on exactly where my problems lie. So if any of you out there have a similar feeling about these movies and can put it into words, let me know in the comments. I could honestly go on naming characters, but I feel like I've emphasized my point enough. There are so many characters with such strong potential in this world, and I think with a bit of a shift in priority, they could have provided us with a much deeper connection to all these amazing characters. People like Chani, Jessica, Stilgar, and even Paul himself. So before I give my conclusions, I just wanted to thank you guys for making it this far into the video, and if you've enjoyed, please give me a little sub. But anyways, I'm fully aware this is going to be a hot take, and many of you may just flat out disagree with me on this, stating something like, Dune's emotional restraint is intentional, and that it reflects the harsh, unforgiving nature of Arrakis and the stoicism of the Fremen. And sure, that's fair, but I'll leave it at this. Even stories about harshness and survival benefit from human moments. The Lord of the Rings deals with despair and war, yet still finds time for levity and love. Blade Runner 2049 explores isolation without sacrificing emotional connection. Intentional or not, the lack of emotional downtime in Dune impacts our ability to connect with these characters, which I think is a huge flaw. Spectacle makes a story grand, but making me feel things makes a movie memorable. And unfortunately, this movie just didn't do it for me. And, that's it.
Willy Wonka.
Holy fucking shit. I really don't want to out your bitch. My cock stopper so big and juicy. She loved how long it lasted.